In the early 20th century, Japan was already a nation with ambitions far greater than its size. Isolated for centuries, Japan had burst onto the global stage during the late 1800s with the Meiji Restoration, a period of modernization and industrialization that shocked the world. The country quickly adopted Western technologies, military strategies, and education systems, transforming itself from a feudal society into a modern power within just a few decades. But the hunger for resources and power pushed Japan into an imperial path. By the 1930s, it was a major military force, expanding aggressively into Asia. This ambition, however, would soon lead to devastation. World War II became the darkest chapter in Japan's history. After years of brutal conflict, the war ended with the unimaginable, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. In a matter of moments, 2 cities were destroyed and hundreds of thousands of lives were lost. Beyond the physical destruction, Japan was left in shock. Its empire collapsed, its economy was in ruins, and its people were left with little more than despair. The surrender marked not only the end of Japan's imperial dreams, but also the beginning of a long and painful road to recovery. In 1945, Japan was a nation on its knees. The statistics of post-war Japan are staggering. Over 2.5 million Japanese people had died during the war. Cities were bombed to rubble. Transportation networks were shattered. Industrial production had fallen to a fraction of pre-war levels. Hunger was widespread and millions were unemployed. Inflation was spiraling, and black markets became the main source of survival for ordinary citizens. For many, the future looked hopeless. How could a small island nation, stripped of its colonies and resources, rise again? The answer began with reform. Under the U.S. occupation led by General Douglas MacArthur, Japan was forced to rebuild its institutions from the ground up. One of the most significant reforms was land redistribution. Large estates owned by powerful landlords were broken up, and farmland was given to ordinary peasants. This gave millions of families a sense of ownership and stability, and it created a more equal society. At the same time, democratic reforms introduced freedom of speech, labor rights, and the foundations of a parliamentary system. Women were given the right to vote, and unions became legal. For the first time, Japan's political system was being reshaped to empower its citizens. But political reform alone would not rebuild the economy. Japan needed jobs, industries, and exports. The United States played a critical role in this process. Through financial aid and guidance, the U.S. helped Japan stabilize its currency and rebuild its industries. The Dodge Plan of 1949, named after American banker Joseph Dodge, introduced strict fiscal discipline to curb inflation and stabilize the yen. Though painful at first, it laid the foundation for sustainable growth. At the same time, American aid flowed into Japan through programs like the Government Appropriation for Relief in Occupied Areas, GARI-OA. These funds provided food, raw materials, and essential goods, keeping the population afloat while rebuilding began. The Korean War 1950-1953 became an unexpected blessing for Japan's economy. As American forces fought in Korea, Japan became the logistical base for supplies, repairs, and manufacturing. Factories that had been idle sprang back to life, producing vehicles, uniforms, and equipment for the U.S. military. In just a few years, Japan's economy surged. Industrial production doubled between 1950 and 1952, and the foundation was laid for what economists would later call the Japanese miracle. The miracle was driven by a combination of cultural, social, and institutional factors. Culturally, the Japanese people embraced discipline, hard work, and collective effort. A spirit of sacrifice and dedication to rebuilding the nation permeated society. Socially, the reforms had created a more equal distribution of wealth, giving workers incentives to be productive. Institutionally, the Japanese government, working through agencies like the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, directed resources into strategic industries. MITI carefully selected sectors like steel, shipbuilding, and later electronics, channeling loans, subsidies, and protectionist policies to help them grow. This close cooperation between government and business became known as the developmental state model. By the mid-1950s, Japan was already surprising the world. Steel production skyrocketed, shipyards were building massive vessels, and textile exports were flooding global markets. The Japanese yen, once unstable, became strong. The economy was growing at an astonishing rate of nearly 10% annually. Ordinary Japanese citizens began to see their lives improve dramatically. By the late 1950s, household ownership of televisions, washing machines, and refrigerators soared. What had once been luxuries became accessible to middle-class families. Japan was no longer just recovering, it was racing ahead. The 1960s marked Japan's arrival on the global stage as an economic power. The Tokyo Olympics of 1964 symbolized the rebirth of the nation. Sleek new bullet trains, the Shinkansen, amazed the world, traveling at speeds no passenger train had ever achieved. Modern highways, airports, and skyscrapers showcased Japan's transformation from a bombed-out country to a futuristic hub. Behind the scenes, Japanese companies like Toyota, Sony, Panasonic, and Honda were rising as global giants. Cars, radios, and televisions made in Japan gained a reputation for quality and affordability. Exports surged and the trade balance shifted in Japan's favor. The once impoverished nation was now competing with Western economies. At the heart of this growth was a unique work culture. Japanese employees often dedicated their entire careers to one company, fostering loyalty and stability. Lifetime employment systems ensured job security, while seniority-based promotions rewarded experience. The concept of kaizen, or continuous improvement, became central to Japanese manufacturing. Factories constantly refined their processes, eliminating waste and improving efficiency. This culture of discipline and innovation allowed Japanese products to dominate global markets. Still, this rapid rise was not without costs. Workers endured long hours, and the pressure to succeed was immense. Social expectations placed heavy burdens on employees, leading to phenomena like karoshi, or death from overwork. Yet despite these challenges, the collective determination to rebuild and prosper remained unshaken. The memory of war and poverty was still fresh, and no one wanted to return to those dark days. By the end of the 1960s, Japan had firmly established itself as a leading industrial power. Its GDP growth averaged nearly 10% per year for 2 decades, a feat unmatched by any other major economy at the time. Exports accounted for a growing share of the economy, and Japanese brands were becoming household names across the world. The success of Toyota in the automobile industry and Sony in electronics demonstrated Japan's ability to innovate and compete on the highest levels. The foundations of what would become the second largest economy in the world were now in place. The story of Japan's recovery from the ashes of war to an industrial powerhouse in just 2 decades is nothing short of extraordinary. But this was only the beginning. The following decades would see Japan rise even higher, challenging the United States and Europe, and experiencing both triumph and turbulence in its economic journey. By the early 1970s, Japan had achieved what many thought was impossible. From the ashes of war, it had become the second largest economy in the world, behind only the United States. Its industrial output rivaled that of Europe, and its products were sold on every continent. Japanese cars, televisions, and electronics became synonymous with reliability and innovation. This period came to be known as the height of the Japanese economic miracle. The 1970s tested Japan's resilience. The oil crises of 1973 and 1979 sent shockwaves through the global economy, threatening countries that were heavily dependent on energy imports. Japan, with few natural resources of its own, was among the most vulnerable. Yet instead of collapsing, Japan adapted with remarkable speed. Companies invested in energy efficiency, developing cars that consumed less fuel and factories that minimized energy use. Japanese automakers such as Toyota and Honda gained a massive advantage, producing fuel-efficient cars just as American and European manufacturers were struggling with gas-guzzling models. Once again, Japan turned crisis into opportunity. During this era, Japan's export-driven model reached new heights. Automobiles became the crown jewel of Japanese industry. Toyota, Nissan, and Honda dominated markets around the world, challenging Detroit's big three automakers in their own backyard. Sony, Panasonic, and Sharp led the consumer electronics revolution with cutting-edge televisions, radios, and cassette players. Japanese cameras from Canon and Nikon became the gold standard for professionals and amateurs alike. The label "Made in Japan," once associated with cheap goods, had become a mark of excellence. Behind this success was a powerful combination of government policy and corporate strategy. The Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, continued to guide industrial policy, ensuring that resources flowed into strategic sectors. Banks provided generous financing to corporations, supported by close ties between government, business, and finance. The Keiretsu system, a network of interlinked companies with cross-shareholdings, created stability and encouraged long-term investment. Unlike Western corporations focused on quarterly profits, Japanese companies planned decades into the future. This long-term vision helped them outmaneuver competitors. By the 1980s, Japan's economy seemed unstoppable. Its GDP growth remained strong, and its companies dominated global markets. Japanese management techniques, such as just-in-time production and Kaizen, were studied and copied worldwide. Business schools taught Japanese models as examples of excellence. The West began to fear Japan's rise. Books and films warned of a future where Japan would overtake the United States as the world's leading power. Tokyo's stock market surged, and land prices in the city reached astronomical levels. At the peak of the boom, it was said that the land beneath the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was worth more than all of California. Japan was on top of the world. But this spectacular rise carried hidden dangers. The bubble economy of the 1980s was built on speculation in stocks and real estate. Easy credit, loose monetary policy, and overconfidence fueled a frenzy of investment. Corporations borrowed heavily, consumers spent lavishly, and asset prices soared far beyond their real value. By 1989, the Nikkei stock index reached nearly 39,000 points, more than double its level just a few years earlier. Everyone believed the boom would last forever. They were wrong. In the early 1990s, the bubble burst. Stock prices collapsed, real estate values plummeted, and the banking system was left with mountains of bad debt. The Nikkei lost more than half its value in just a few years, and land prices fell for over a decade. The economy stagnated, beginning what became known as Japan's lost decade. Growth slowed to near zero, unemployment rose, and deflation set in. For a country that had grown accustomed to rapid progress, the shock was profound. The 1990s and 2000s forced Japan to confront deep structural problems. An aging population meant fewer workers and more retirees. The rigid employment system struggled to adapt to globalization and new industries. Banks burdened with bad loans hesitated to lend, stifling entrepreneurship. Meanwhile, China and South Korea began to rise as formidable competitors, offering cheaper labor and innovative products. Japan's once unshakable dominance in consumer electronics began to fade, as companies like Samsung and LG captured global markets. Even in automobiles, competition grew fiercer. Yet despite these challenges, Japan remained a technological powerhouse. While growth slowed, innovation did not disappear. Japan continued to lead in robotics, precision engineering, and advanced manufacturing. Companies like Toyota pioneered hybrid vehicles, setting new standards for environmental efficiency. Sony and Nintendo reinvented themselves through entertainment and gaming, producing global icons like the PlayStation and Mario. Japan's bullet trains remained marvels of modern transport, inspiring similar systems in countries around the world. Even in decline, Japan's influence was immense. Culturally, Japan captured the world's imagination in new ways. Anime and manga became global phenomena, shaping the childhoods of millions. From Dragon Ball to Pokémon, Japanese characters and stories became part of global pop culture. Japanese cuisine spread worldwide, with sushi restaurants opening in every major city. The concept of cool Japan emerged as fashion, music, and cultural exports gained popularity. Even as its economic growth slowed, Japan maintained soft power that extended far beyond its borders. Domestically, however, the challenges deepened. The population continued to age rapidly, with one of the highest life expectancies in the world, but one of the lowest birth rates. Rural areas depopulated as young people moved to cities. Social issues like loneliness and overwork became more visible. Economic reforms were attempted, but progress was slow. Governments changed frequently, and political instability made decisive action difficult. The dream of regaining the high growth of the 1960s and 1970s seemed out of reach. Still, Japan adapted in ways that reflected its resilience. Robotics became a solution to labor shortages, with machines assisting in factories, hospitals, and even homes. Renewable energy projects expanded after the 2011 Fukushima disaster highlighted the dangers of nuclear power. Companies invested in high-tech industries such as semiconductors, biotechnology, and advanced materials. Japan also became a leader in environmental technologies, from hybrid cars to energy-efficient appliances. By the 2010s, Japan's economy had stabilized, though it remained slow-growing compared to its peak years. It was still the third largest economy in the world, behind only the United States and China. Its companies remained leaders in many fields, from automobiles to robotics. Tokyo hosted the 2020 Olympics, delayed to 2021 due to the pandemic, symbolizing once again Japan's endurance and ability to shine on the global stage. The world continued to look to Japan for inspiration in design, technology, and culture. Today, Japan faces a crossroads. Its strengths, discipline, innovation, and resilience are as strong as ever. Its weaknesses, demographics, deflation, and competition remain daunting. Can Japan reinvent itself once more, as it did after World War II? The answer lies in its ability to harness its creativity and adapt to a changing world. From smart cities to green technology, from anime to robotics, Japan has the potential to remain a global leader, not just in economics but in culture and innovation. The story of Japan is not just about numbers or industries. It is about a people who refuse to give up. From the devastation of Hiroshima to the glittering skyline of Tokyo, from the chaos of the lost decade to the cultural explosion of anime and technology, Japan has continuously reinvented itself. It may no longer be the unstoppable miracle of the 1980s, but it is still a nation that inspires, surprises, and innovates. The lessons of Japan's rise, fall, and endurance remain as relevant as ever. So when we look at Japan today, we should not see a country that has declined, but a country that has evolved. It has weathered storms that would have destroyed others. It has turned crisis into opportunity time and again. And while its future may not be certain, one thing is clear: Japan's story is far from over. From samurai to salarymen, from atomic ruins to robotic revolutions, the journey of Japan is one of the most extraordinary transformations in modern history.